Two 15-year-old boys have been charged in connection with the alleged murder of a 14-year-old. We're going to break down this very upsetting case with Steve Baric, trial attorney and former prosecutor who has experience in juvenile crimes. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. We have a case of alleged teen-on-teen violence that is incredibly tragic and disturbing, and it concerns the death of 14-year-old Bobby Maher out in Wyoming. Police say two teens attacked him outside of the East Ridge Mall out in Casper, one that held him down and the other who stabbed him to death. That's the allegations. Jareth Joseflee Sebastian Plunkett, 15 years old, was arraigned on charges of murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated assault, and battery and theft. He pleaded not guilty and not guilty by reason of mental illness or deficiency to all four charges. Then we have Dominique Antonio Richard Harris, also 15 years old. He was arraigned on charges of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, aggravated assault and battery, and misdemeanor theft. He pleaded not guilty to each of those three charges, and reportedly his attorney has reserved the right to plead not guilty by reason of mental illness or deficiency. And we'll get to that in a little bit more. But do you know what apparently sparked all of this? Reporting indicates that Bobby was trying to protect his girlfriend and her friend. Police say both Harris and Plunkett, they admitted to stealing kitchen knives from a Target at the mall prior to the altercation and the stabbing. They reportedly were wearing masks, with Harris allegedly telling police later on that he and Plunkett wanted to, quote, cause trouble. Now, according to police, Harris admitted that Plunkett took the knife knowing they were going to fight Bobby. Yeah, it's been reported that the boys had wanted to fight this 14-year-old after he allegedly called them freaks 2 weeks earlier in an earlier incident. So there was seemingly bad blood here. And eventually, they see Bobby's girlfriend. They allegedly began following her in the mall. She reportedly calls Bobby. He gets a ride to the mall. He shows up. Then these alleged assailants apparently see Bobby leaving a Dick's Sporting Goods. A verbal altercation breaks out outside the store. A big group of people start to watch. And apparently someone video recorded what happens next on their cell phone. And according to authorities, Bobby, quote, clearly did not want to fight. As they say, the video shows him moving away and even puts his hands up. Plunkett allegedly tells police later on that Bobby said, put the knife away, this isn't fair, to which Plunkett allegedly said, I don't play fair. And it's alleged that Harris grabbed Bobby around the waist, lifting him off the ground, slamming him down with great force on his left side. He then apparently holds Bobby, hits him, while Plunkett then allegedly stabs the 14-year-old. Plunkett allegedly admitted to police that he stabbed Bobby. Now, Harris reportedly told police afterwards that Bobby never threw a punch, never slapped, never pushed anyone, which is important if we're talking about something like self-defense or who the aggressor was. Bobby was unconscious after this purported attack. Adults already at the scene. They tried to save his life with CPR. First responders arrived, but it was too late. Bobby succumbed to his injuries and he died. Now, both the boys were arrested. They are being tried as adults. And now for that, I want to talk about what we can expect in this case. And I want to bring on trial attorney and former prosecutor Steve Baric, who has experience in the area of juvenile crime. Steve, thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar. What are your thoughts on this one?
Thank you. Well, I mean, my initial thoughts are what a terrible, terrible tragedy. And my heart goes out to Bobby's family. I as a father of a teenage son myself, I can't even imagine what they're going through. It's terrible. And I think, you know, my initial stint as a prosecutor, I prosecuted juvenile crimes and juvenile gang crimes here in California. And it's a very, very difficult thing to deal with because you have children acting in the most grisly way. You know, I haven't seen photographs of these two perpetrators, but I'm sure they have, you know, childlike faces, angelic faces at times, and you can't even imagine that they're capable of something as heinous as this. So my initial thoughts are to the family, but what a terrible, terrible tragedy. And it is shocking anytime something like this happens.
It really is. It really is. And talking about the youth for a second, Is it appropriate under these circumstances to try these 15-year-olds as adults?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. We had a law here that passed about 20 years ago that I believe set the standard at the age of 16 that allowed people to be tried, or kids to be tried as adults. I would submit to you that, it's only in extraordinary cases like this that a prosecutor would seek to prosecute these individuals as adults in something like a homicide like this. Otherwise, I would imagine that these two young men would be released from custody when they're 21, and that's not just as well. So they're very difficult legal questions, to be sure. But I think in cases like murder, I'm sure the statute in Wyoming provides for that. I'm sure the legislatures thought this through. And I think although it's a hard decision, I think in this case, it's absolutely the right thing to do, sure.
When I was looking up Wyoming law on this, some of the factors that I believe they consider are, was this in a particularly violent crime? Was it premeditated? Was it willful?
Right.
What is the danger to the community, which I think you touched upon as well. And I think that aspect of it, and I kind of laid it out, some of the allegations that, they were allegedly causing trouble. They purchased the knives knowing that they're looking for Bobby, or that they wanted to attack Bobby. I think that's the aspect of it that is probably swaying prosecutors right now, right?
Oh, for sure. I think in this case, look, if this was an adult case, it would be in the state of California, first degree murder for sure, because you would have premeditation and deliberation. I did some reading on this case as well, and apparently there was an altercation in the park about a week prior.
Yep.
Clearly there was planning that went into this from these two guys. And so absolutely, I think all those factors that you just outlined in the statute are present here. And I think that's why the prosecution has decided to prosecute these kids as adults, for sure.
Hey guys, I want to take a minute to thank the sponsor of this episode, because it's the support of our partners that help us to continue to bring you these very important stories. And with that, I want to thank Upside. So Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, dining, and believe it or not, I do know how to pump my own gas. I don't know if that was controversial or not, but when I do, I can use Upside. Why not get cash back when you fill up your tank? And yes, this is actual real cash back, no confusing rewards or points or credits, just actual money you can transfer straight to your bank account. So once you have the app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside, you pay as usual using a debit or credit card, and you follow the steps on the app and you get paid, as you just saw me do. You can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon Mobil, 7-Eleven, Sunoco, restaurants like Chipotle, Papa John's, Dairy Queen, Domino's, KFC, Taco Bell, and that's just to name a few. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code SIDEBAR, and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code SIDEBAR for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. I mentioned this mental health defense. We both know that insanity is a very, very tough road. But I looked up Wyoming law on this, and it says that the defendant shall have the burden of going forward and proving by the greater weight of evidence that as a result of mental illness or deficiency, he lacked capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. At this stage,
Right.
based on these facts, is that fit for either defendant?
Well, no, at this stage, based on what we know, probably not, right? Acting, immature, acting crazy, acting out of rage, acting out of vengeance, that doesn't equate to, mental disease or defect or insanity or whatever Wyoming state law calls it. So no, based on the facts that we know at this point, no. But generally, this is generally a decision that a court is going to have to decide. If it provides for a jury trial in the state of Wyoming, this issue may come before a court before a jury ever deals with that. But they'll put on experts, and I'm sure between now and then you'll have expert testimony trying to paint out that picture, trying to lay out, what factors cause these two kids to act so extreme. And so that'll be an interesting legal battle over the next several months, maybe years, I would imagine, for sure.
What complicates their defense, I imagine, is what they allegedly told police. They had an understanding of what they did. And I was curious about that in your experience.
Right.
Do you see in juvenile cases, violent juvenile cases, where these juveniles do end up speaking to police and admitting to what they did?
So generally, because a lot of times they're, these kids are less sophisticated, there are a lot of times special protections, not only Miranda, but other special protections that involve the interview of minors with police. Like I believe in certain states, a parent has to be present. So it'll be interesting to see what is available in Wyoming. But if, as a potential defense lawyer, absolutely, they are going to have to go after and try and exclude those statements to the police because they are particularly damaging and they particularly impact this potential insanity defense big time.
Let's get into some of those statements. So Harris, who is not facing the actual murder charge, but the conspiracy charge, other charges, he does essentially face life in prison. So he allegedly admits to holding Bobby down, says this in an interview with police, said that he thought it was to make sure the fight was over. He also recounted this incident when Plunkett said that he wanted to gut that dude. And then this incident when Plunkett said he was going to shank someone. And then another incident when Plunkett had mentioned allegedly shooting at some ex-girlfriend's house. And it's interesting when I was reading it, and I mentioned before some of the comments from Mr. Harris, he's putting a lot of it on Plunkett, which could very well be the circumstances. But do you almost get the sense that he's turning on his friend, his co-defendant, and whether or not that will be advantageous to him on a legal front?
Well, look, it's the quintessential defense strategy, right? I prosecuted gang crimes for a long time, and anytime you're dealing with multiple defendants, it's almost instinctual as a human being to say, yeah, what I did was wrong, but he was worse, right? He was the heavy. That's pretty common. It's interesting, right? To me, as a prosecutor, I would be very surprised if we didn't find out more about these two guys that killed Bobby. That meaning other things, their other criminal conduct, maybe associating with criminal street gangs, maybe having relatives who had it. It's to go to such an extreme. 1 minute you're a middle schooler, the next minute you're stabbing somebody and killing them. That's usually a big leap. The average teenager, preteen doesn't usually do that. So I would be very interested to see if I was preparing this case as a prosecutor, I'd want to know more about Plunkett. If I made the determination that, I believe you mentioned it was this young guy named Harris, if he's saying that, Plunkett talked about shooting at his ex-girlfriend's home or something like that, I'd want to get into that. And if I thought that that was the case, I would definitely seek to see whether or not it would make sense to give Harris a deal in order for testimony against the stabber.
And I wonder if you even need him, if a lot of it's on video and you have eyewitnesses who saw this. And look, I also imagine that this could be a situation where they had each of them in separate interrogation rooms, and one's getting information from another, maybe one's not cooperative, and we don't know the sequence of information, how it came out. Harris might have been talking a lot before Plunkett was. You see that in sometimes those cases as well, right?
Yeah, I think, it's really going to be determinate. This is not a whodunit case. We know who did it. We know it was Harris and Plunkett. I think it's really whether or not you decide to utilize Mr. Harris versus Mr. Plunkett is really dependent on what level of homicide the prosecution is looking to accomplish. Like a lot of times prosecutors struggle with these mental defenses in terms of insanity, diminished capacity like we have here in the state of California. And a lot of that is if a jury is sitting there and looking at Mr. Plunkett with his 15-year-old, 16-year-old face at the time of trial and say, there has to be something wrong with this guy for that young person to commit such a heinous crime. That's where you may sit there and go, okay, do I want to utilize Harris's testimony regarding just what Plunkett's mental state was as they were heading over to the mall that day or interfacing with Bobby?
And By the way, before I have one more question about the bystanders, but before we even get to that, the idea of them automatically now being tried as adults, can their defense attorneys make a legal fight to get this transferred to juvenile court, and how would that work?
Oh, absolutely. I think that they would take some sort of writ. Generally, there's a process in most state courts prior to there's an analysis made prior to the case being filed in adult court or proceeding that this case meets the requirements of state law for a juvenile to be tried as an adult. But absolutely, taking some sort of interlocutory appeal, some sort of argument to the Court of Appeals saying, look, this does not meet the requirements of the statute. They're absolutely going to do that. I think if they didn't, that would be a mistake. This is so significant for these two defendants that they would have to address that issue for sure.
And I want to go back to the bystanders for a second. So if people were watching this go down and they didn't lend a hand, can they face any kind of liability at all?
Not generally. I mean, I think in certain states they've made attempts at, bystander liability laws, but by and large, no. Unfortunately, you would hope that they would, intercede, but I don't think they're going to face any criminal liability for failing to do so.
So I'm going to end on this. Whenever I cover a case like this, first of all, our hearts and prayers go out to Bobby Maher's family. But you also have to remember that when you're dealing with two teens who are accused of heinous crimes, you also have to think about their families as well, because this is a tragedy for everyone involved. And it's such a horrific case. And we will see where it goes on the legal front. But my gosh, a 14-year-old's life taken away, and essentially now what could be two 15-year-olds' lives and the lives of their families will never be the same. So it's just a really, really sad case. But Steve Baric, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.